Hello, my friends, and welcome back to Kate D. Camillo's The Tale of Despereaux. When we left off last time, we had just met a couple of new characters. In fact, we're starting book 2. So we've gone back in time before Despereaux was even born so that we can meet a young rat named Roscuro, named after Chiara Roscuro, which is an art term which talks about the arrangement of light and shadow or light and dark in a painting or a drawing. That really makes a lot of sense when we start to consider the theme, or one of the themes, of the Tale of Despereaux, which is light versus dark, good versus evil. And a question that keeps plaguing me is, can a character be both light and dark? Can they be both good and evil? And reader, if that can be true, couldn't that be said for all of us? That all of us have goodness inside of us without a doubt. But there are some, and all, a little bit of naughty in all of us, a little bit of darkness inside. I wonder what the story is for Roscuro, though. Is he a light or is he a dark character? Can a character change over time? Perhaps that will be Roscuro's fate. We also met Botticelli Rimorso. He is a very interesting character. He is very concerned about Roscuro's obsession with the light. He recognizes that light represents life in the castle, which is light and good. A stark contrast to the darkness of the dungeon where rats live. So Botticelli spent a considerable amount of time talking to Roscuro, or perhaps hypnotizing him, it's hard to say, into believing that he was a rat, to stay away from the light. But my friends, he could not. The call of the light of the castle was so strong that Roscuro went to the top of the stairs. He went into the ballroom and he invited himself to the banquet, the royal banquet, where we've met the Queen. We found King Philip and Princess P and all the noble people there enjoying a lovely feast. What could go wrong? A rat shows up to a party like that. I can't see anything that could possibly go wrong. Can you? Okay, friends, turn with me, if you will, to page 106. That's chapter 20. The title of it is A View from a Chandelier. Now, as you know, a chandelier is one of those beautiful, fancy, glittery lights that hangs in very fancy places. They're much larger and they have several light bulbs or candles on them. It probably would have been candles during this time. So, a view from a chandelier. There was in the banquet hall a most beautiful and ornate chandelier. The crystals that hung from it caught the light and the candles on the table and the light from the face of the laughing princess. They danced to the rhythm of the minstrel's music, swaying back and forth, twinkling and beckoning. Beckoning means saying, "Come here." Sounds like some personification to me. What better place to view all of this glory, all of this beauty? There was so much laughing and singing and juggling that no one noticed as Roscuro crawled up a table leg and onto the table, and from there flung himself onto the lowest branch of the chandelier. Hanging by one paw, he swung back and forth, admiring the spectacle below him, the smells of the food, the sounds of the music, and the light. Oh, the light, the light! It was amazing, unbelievable. Roscuro smiled and shook his head. Unfortunately, a rat can hang from a chandelier for only so long before he is discovered. This would be true at even the loudest of parties. Reader, do you know who it was that spotted him? You're right. The sharp-eyed Princess P. "A rat!" she shouted. A rat is hanging from the chandelier!" The party, as I have noted, was loud. The minstrels were strumming and singing. The people were laughing and eating. The man with the jingle cap was juggling and jingling. No one in the midst of all this merriment heard P. No one except for Roscuro. Rat. He had never before been aware of what an ugly word it was. Rat. In the middle of all of that beauty, it immediately became clear that it was an extremely distasteful syllable. Rat. A curse, an insult, a word totally without light. And not until he heard it from the mouth of the princess did Roscuro realize that he did not like being a rat, that he did not want to be a rat. The revelation hit Roscuro with such force that it made him lose his grip on the chandelier. The rat, reader, fell. And alas, he fell right directly into the queen's soup. That can't end well. Chapter 21. Well, the queen's last words. The queen loved soup. She loved soup more than anything in the world except for Princess P and the king. And because the queen loved it, soup was served in the castle for every banquet, every lunch, and every dinner. And what soup it was! Cook's love and admiration for the queen and her palate moved the broth that she concocted from the level of mere food to high art. On this particular day, for this particular banquet, Cook had outdone herself. The soup was a masterwork, a delicate mingling of chicken, watercress, and garlic. Roscuro, as he surfaced from the bottom of the queen's capacious bowl, could not help taking a few appreciative sips. "Lovely," he said, distracted for a moment from the misery of his existence. "Delightful." "See!" shouted the Princess P. "See!" She stood. She pointed her finger right at Roscuro. "It's a rat! I told you that it was a rat! It was hanging from the chandelier and now it's in Mama's soup!" The musicians stopped playing their guitars. The jugglers stopped juggling. The noble people stopped eating. The queen looked at Roscuro. Roscuro looked at the queen. Reader, in the spirit of honesty, I must utter a difficult and unsavory truth. They are really rather nasty beasts, particularly if one happens to appear in your bowl of soup with pieces of watercress clinging from its whiskers. There was a long moment of silence, and then Roscuro said to the queen, "I beg your pardon." In response, the queen flung her spoon into the air and made an incredible noise. A noise that was in no way worthy of a queen. A noise somewhere between the neigh of a horse and the squeal of a pig. A noise that sounded something like... And then she said, "There's a rat in my soup." The queen was really a simple soul, and always, her whole life, had done nothing except state the overly obvious. She died as she lived. "There's a rat in my soup," were the last words she uttered. She clutched her chest and fell over backwards. Her royal chair hit the floor with a thump, and the banquet hall exploded. Spoons were dropped. Chairs were flung back. "Save her!" thundered the king. "You must save her!" All of the king's men ran to try to rescue the queen. Roscuro climbed out of the bowl of soup. He felt that, under the circumstances, it would be best if he left. As he crawled across the tablecloth, he remembered the words of the pioneer in the dungeon. His regret that he did not look back at his daughter as he left. Not a pioneer, a prisoner. Back up, please. As he crawled across the tablecloth, he remembered the words of the prisoner in the dungeon. Of his regret that he did not look back at his daughter as he left her. And so, Roscuro turned. He looked back, and he saw that the princess was glaring at him. Her eyes were filled with disgust and anger. "Go back to the dungeon," was what the look she gave him said. "Go back into the darkness where you belong." This look, reader, broke Roscuro's heart. Did you not think that rats had hearts? Wrong. All things, all living things have a heart, and the heart of any living thing can be broken. If the rat had not looked over his shoulder, perhaps his heart would not have broken, and it is possible then that I would not have a story to tell. But reader, he did look. Chapter 22. He puts his heart together again. Roscuro hurried from the banquet hall. A rat. He put his paw over his heart. "I am a rat, and there's no light for rat. There will be no light for me." The king's men were still bent over the queen. The king was still shouting, "Save her! Save her!" And the queen was still dead, of course, when Roscuro encountered the queen's royal soup spoon laying on the floor. "I will have something beautiful," he said aloud. "I am a rat, but I will have something beautiful. I will have a crown of my own." He picked up the spoon and put it on his head. "Yes," said Roscuro, "I will have something beautiful, and I will have revenge. Both things, somehow." There are those hearts, reader, and this is one of my favorite quotes from the book. There are those hearts, reader, that never mend again once they are broken. Or, if they do mend, they heal themselves in a crooked and lopsided way, as if sewn together by a careless craftsman. Such was the fate of Chiara Roscuro. His heart was broken. Picking up the spoon and placing it on his head, speaking of revenge, these things helped him to put his heart back together again. But it was, alas, put together wrong. "Where's the rat?" shouted the king. "Find that rat!" "If you want me," muttered Roscuro as he left the banquet hall, "I will be in the dungeon, in the darkness." Chapter 23. Consequences. There were, of course, dire consequences to Roscuro's behavior. Every action, reader, no matter how small, has a consequence. For instance, the young Roscuro gnawed on Gregory the jailer's rope, and because he gnawed on the rope, a match was lit in his face. And because a match was lit in his face, his soul was set afire. The rat's soul was set afire, and because of this he journeyed upstairs seeking the light. Upstairs in the banquet hall, Princess P spotted him and called out the word rat. And because of this, Roscuro fell into the queen's soup. And because the rat fell into the queen's soup, the queen died. You can see, can't you, how everything is related to everything else? You can see quite clearly how every action has its consequence. For instance, if, reader, you will indulge me and allow me to continue this meditation on consequences, Because the queen died while eating soup, the heartbroken king outlawed soup. And because soup was outlawed, so were all the instruments involved in the making and eating of soup. Spoons and bowls and kettles. Those are like pots. These things were collected from all the people of the kingdom of Dor, and they were piled in the dungeon. And because Roscuro was dazzled by the light of one match and journeyed upstairs and fell into the queen's soup, and the queen died, the king ordered the death of every rat in the land. The king's men went bravely into the dungeon to kill the rats. But the thing about killing a rat is that you must first find a rat. If a rat does not want to be found, reader, he will not be found. The king's men succeeded only in getting lost in the dungeon's torturous mazes. Some of them, in fact, did not ever find their way out again and died there in the dark heart of the castle. The dark heart of the castle. I want you to think about that. That's definitely some figurative language. The dark heart of the castle. I want you to also ask yourself, is that figurative darkness? Is it literal darkness? Or is it once again both? Would the dungeon be both dark as in lights out, and dark as in evil? You tell me, reader. And so the killing of all rats was not successful, and in desperation, King Philip declared that rats were illegal. He declared them outlaws. This, of course, is a ridiculous law since rats are outlaws to begin with. I mean, how can you outlaw an outlaw? It is simply a waste of time and energy. But still, the king officially decreed that all rats in the kingdom of Dor were outlaws and should be treated as such. When you are a king, you may make as many ridiculous laws as you like. That's what being a king is all about. But reader, we must not forget that King Philip loved the queen, and without her, he was lost. This is the danger of loving. This is a beautiful quote, too. This is the danger of loving. No matter how powerful you are, no matter how many kingdoms you rule, you cannot stop those you love from dying. Making soup illegal, outlawing rats, these things soothed the poor king's heart, and so we must forgive him. And what of the outlawed rats? What of one outlawed rat in particular? What of Chiaroscuro? In the darkness of the dungeon, he sat in his nest with his spoon atop his head. He set to work fashioning for himself a kingly cape made out of the scrap of the red tablecloth, and as he worked, old One-Ear Botticelli Rimorso sat next to him, swinging his locket back and forth, saying, "You'll see what comes from a rat going upstairs. I hope you have learned your lesson. Your job in this world is to make others suffer." "Yes," said Roscuro. "Yes, that is exactly what I intend to do. I will make the princess suffer for how she looked at me." And as Roscuro worked and planned, the jailer Gregory held tight to his rope and made his own way through the darkness, and in a dank cell the prisoner, who had once had a red tablecloth and now had nothing, spent his days and nights weeping quietly. High above the dungeon stairs in the castle, a small mouse stood alone one evening as his brothers and sisters sniffed for crumbs. He stood with his head cocked to one side, listening to a sweet sound he did not yet have a name for. There would be consequences of the mouse's love for music. You, reader, know already of some of those consequences. Because of the music, the mouse would find his way to the princess. He would fall in love. And speaking of consequences, the same evening that Despereaux stood inside the castle hearing music for the first time, outside the castle, In the gloom of dusk, more consequences drew near. A wagon driven by a king's soldier and piled high with spoons and bowls and kettles was making its way to the castle. And beside the soldier there sat a young girl with ears that looked like nothing so much as pieces of cauliflower stuck on either side of her head. The girl's name, reader, is Miggery Sow, and though she did not know it yet, she would be instrumental in helping the rat work his revenge. This is the end of the second book, and we are done for today. Look in your Google Classroom for your assignment. Enjoy.